Thank you for tuning in to the Voice of the Victim podcast. We discuss a lot of sad and potentially triggering things on this show. We try to be as sensitive and cautious as possible, but if you are sensitive to things involving abuse and may be triggered, please think twice before listening to our show.
Welcome to the Voice of the Victim podcast. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Rosie.
How are you doing tonight, Rosie?
Well, I'm still ill, but I'm not sick. I have a condition called eustachian tube dysfunction in my left ear, for those who are wondering.
Do you want to explain it real quick?
I am in a constant state of buzzing and muffled hearing in my left ear. It's super neat. Something I have to fight through every day.
Yeah, and apparently there's nothing that can be done except wait.
Pretty much. Although I could take a type of steroid or something. That's what my doctor boss told me. Eventually, if it gets to that point.
Before they do surgery?
They're not going to do surgery.
You said if it after a month it's still going.
Maybe.
How long has it been? Since
a week
last
tomorrow.
Wednesday?
Yeah. I was super dizzy and feeling very vertigo-y, but that went away pretty much.
Yeah.
So, anyways, that's it. How are you?
My allergies have been super bad this past couple of weeks where I've just been exhausted. So that combined with your ear thing, we were just like done last week. But we still put out a Patreon episode.
Where I barely held it together.
Was it our 21st Patreon episode?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I think it was. So yeah, let's do this review and then jump into the story. You want to read that, Rosie?
Sure. It's entitled, Love It. Rosie and Ryan are awesome. I listen to them while I'm on my mail route.
Nice.
I love how much they are really in tune with their stories. Their emotions on the stories show how much they care. This podcast isn't like the others. I highly recommend it. The cats are hilarious to hear. It always makes me laugh and put me in a better mood. Keep up the great work, guys. Stay safe. And this is from a smiley face, super,
Yeah.
from USA.
Anime smiley face.
How do they make that smiley face in the review?
It's just a combination of characters.
Oh, that's super neat.
Yeah, but thank you for that review. I'm glad that you appreciate what we do. You ready to jump into this story, Rosie?
I am.
All right, so tonight's story begins in Jonesboro, Arkansas on August 24th, 2011.
Michelle Despain called 911 to report that she'd come home to find her husband, Marc, dead on the floor of their home.
Now, Michelle and Marc had been married for 14 years and had 3 children, a daughter named Brooke and 2 sons, Zach and Blake. So his death was going to be devastating for these 3 children and have a huge impact. Well, let's talk a bit about who Marc was before we get into the rest of that.
Okay. Marc was born on April 16th, 1977, to Jack and Tana Despain. By the time he was 34, he was a successful real estate appraiser and property investor, able to provide his family with a comfortable life.
In March of 2005, they bought a $245,000 home in Jonesboro, which was apparently in a ritzy, exclusive neighborhood and had an in-ground pool in the backyard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in 2005, now it's expensive.
Yeah.
Marc had gotten into the real estate business through his parents, who owned hundreds of rental properties themselves. He worked for his parents for a while, but eventually launched his own company, which he ran from the house with the help of his wife, Michelle.
They lived a pretty extravagant life, making use of their money, going on up to 4 vacations a year.
Nice.
And buying really nice things. I mean, you might as well enjoy being well off if you've earned it, right?
Mm-hmm. Michelle worked at a local bank, as well as using her skill set at home to keep records for Marc's real estate business.
So that's a bit of background on Marc and his family, give you an idea of where they were at. But let's go back to that horrible day when Marc was found dead, August 24th, 2011.
Well, Michelle was hysterical, and she was hard to understand on the 911 call. But she made it clear that she was afraid for her own life, in case the murderer was still around.
Yeah. Now, this next part is really disturbing, but this is what happened to Marc, so brace yourselves.
When police arrived, they found Marc's body with 2 gunshot wounds. One on the left side of his chest, and one in the head, right between his eyes.
Yeah. So, this tells a really heartbreaking story. It appeared that Marc was shot in the chest either before or after he tried to get away from the attacker, and once he had fallen, he was shot a second time in the head.
When authorities examined the crime scene, they noticed that the home seemed disheveled, with drawers left open and things on the floor that shouldn't be there. It appeared that the intruder had come in through an unlocked door in the back of the house and went on to attack Marc at home when he was working.
But the detective on the scene, Vic Brooks, noticed that there were a lot of valuables that weren't missing, which is typically those things would be missing. They wouldn't be left behind in a burglary. So right away it looked to be more of an intentional and premeditated attack and then staged to look like a random burglary. So now they're left with the question of who did this. And at this point in the investigation, it could have been anyone. This episode of Voice of the Victim podcast is supported by Best Fiends. And you've heard us talk about Best Fiends. It's the colorful and fun puzzle game with literally thousands of levels, tons of cute collectible characters. So if you're tired of the same old puzzle games, Best Fiends is the game for you because they have something new every day, including events, challenges, and new levels to keep you entertained. It also keeps your mind active with challenging but fun and casual puzzles. Rosie, what are you up to in Best Fiends these days?
Oh, there's so much going on with Best Fiends right now. First of all, I would like to tell you guys the level that I'm on currently. 437. Woo!
Yay!
Right now, I'm going on this Dino Dig Site challenge, and it's super fun. I don't even realize that I'm doing it most of the time, and all of a sudden I get rewards for every 4 new levels that I beat. And I'm talking gold, people, and you can do a lot of cool things with gold. So I'm super psyched about it.
Yeah, can I just say how satisfying it is to get a Slugmageddon?
Oh, mm-hmm.
Like when you can just weave them all just perfectly.
And they go, Slugmageddon!
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You also don't need to be connected to the internet to progress through the game, which is pretty cool. So join us and millions of other people who are already playing this fun puzzle game. Download Best Fiends for free on the Apple App Store or Google Play today. That's friends without the R. Best Fiends.
Detective Brooks waited until the next day to give Michelle some time to process everything before questioning her. The next day, she told him that she'd gone out to lunch with Marc just a few hours before she found him, and he was doing just fine and returned to work around 1:30 p.m. Just over an hour later, she said she had stopped at home quickly to grab some bills that needed to be paid when she found Marc and went on to call 911.
But when they asked her if she had any idea who could have done this, her answer shocked them.
She said she suspected it could have been Marc's father, Jack. She said that she hates to think he'd do anything like this to his son, but that he was very cold-hearted toward her and Marc.
Apparently, Michelle and Jack had had a huge fight over money while Marc was working for Jack, and Marc took his wife's side, defending her, which led to them eventually parting ways when it comes to business. Marc was no longer working for his father, and that's when Marc started his own business. But after that, things had never been the same, and there was some resentment there.
Michelle's dad, Carl Kelley, was also questioned, and he was also asked if he had any idea who could have done this. He suspected Jack as well, but when Jack was brought in, he told detectives that the business split from his son was fine with him, and that he didn't hold any resentment. He told detectives that both he and his wife Tana wanted the business separation.
Yeah, so from that, it seemed like there was really no motive for Jack. But then another wild detail came out. Apparently, Michelle had found photos of her teenage daughter, Brooke, on Grandpa Jack's phone.
Ooh.
And she was topless.
Ugh.
So obviously, that would be awful. And apparently, this is when the real wedge was driven between Marc and Jack.
Michelle told detectives that after that, Marc wanted nothing to do with his father. And Jack's wife, Tana, actually left him after she found out about this.
I mean, yeah. It'd be a horrible thing to find out you're married to a total pervert, or that your father was not only a pervert, but attracted to your daughter.
Yeah. Yikes.
But things were not quite as they seemed in that situation.
Later, Brooke revealed that she had borrowed her grandpa's phone to take pictures of herself to send to a boy she liked. Why on grandpa's phone? And why wouldn't you delete those?
Exactly what I was thinking. That's really odd.
But this was a huge relief to Tana, who returned to her husband after all of this came into light.
What are you thinking right now?
I'm thinking, I'm not buying this.
Very interesting. Well, let's keep going.
If this all turned out to be a misunderstanding, and Jack was fine with Marc splitting from the family business, why would Jack want to kill his own son?
Well, when Tana was questioned about this, again, that's Marc's mom, she claimed that the whole thing was planned out by Michelle. And that Michelle asked Brooke to do this so she could drive a wedge between Marc and Jack. Wrap your mind around that. What are you thinking right now, Rosie?
I'm rereading to make sure I heard this right. Okay, Tana said that this was planned out by Michelle.
So Michelle is Brooke's mom.
Is Brooke's mom. Tana is the grandma.
Yes. And
for some reason, grandma knew that mom asked daughter to do this. Okay.
That was her suspicion.
I don't know what I think about that. That's like, this is a real whodunit board game.
Well, let's keep going.
But even after the truth about this came out, Marc and Jack still never spoke to each other again about this.
Or at all. This is the last time they ever had any contact.
Okay. Jack told the interrogators that Marc was hard-nosed and not a great people person. He told them, quote, as long as he could get that dollar out of you, he'd turn around and crap on you and walk away. You know, and that's the way he was.
So how would you feel if you were a detective and you heard someone talking about their recently deceased son like this?
I would be like, you know I'm the detective, right?
Yeah, it's weird. So it started again to seem like there could have been motive after all. But after that, what else did they learn from Michelle's father?
Well, Carl Kelley, who was Michelle's dad, who also worked for Marc's real estate appraisal company, told interrogators that Jack had called Marc, quote, the devil's advocate, or even, quote, the devil himself. He also claimed that he heard Jack make threats to Marc that he would ruin him and his family.
So that's a pretty harsh thing to say to your kid.
Yeah, they have a real bad relationship.
Yeah, that's a kind of a theme through this whole episode is really dramatic and messed up family.
Even during the interrogation, Jack seemed erratic. One moment he would talk about Marc being selfish and manipulative, and then the next moment he would be sobbing uncontrollably over his death.
So given everything they knew at this point, detectives suspected that Jack was faking his grief. Which, is that how you're feeling too, Rosie?
Well, actually, I was kind of like, oh, well, maybe he's just so emotional.
That's true.
These emotions are so different hands.
There is no right way to react to something like this.
So I'm actually pleased that he was sobbing uncontrollably at moments.
Well,
like it makes more sense to me now.
Yeah. Well then, to make him look even more suspicious here, he deflected the blame onto one of the people who had suspected him.
That's always a good look.
Yeah.
Jack told detectives that Carl Kelley also hated Marc, his son-in-law. He said he was suspicious that Marc had finally done something to piss off Carl enough to do something like this. Okay. He even padded this accusation by saying, "I'm not trying to point my finger. That's just a concern." So, I'm not pointing, but look at me point. That's what he's saying. Adding that Marc was constantly rude to Carl, being very condescending to his father-in-law, and, quote, treating him like a dog, according to Jack.
Yeah, so again, not too fond of his son, it doesn't seem like.
No.
So there are a lot of accusations flying around, and this is a huge mess for detectives to sort through. And it was even more confusing after they questioned Carl about this, and he claimed that Marc treated him really well, even taking him on special outings like deer hunting and spending time together. So again, it's looking bad for Jack.
Michelle also backed this up, saying that her father had a good relationship with both Marc and her. But Jack claimed that they were lying to hide Carl's guilt, claiming that Carl had made death threats against Marc.
So basically, both fathers are claiming that the other one had threatened Marc, but Jack also claimed that Carl had threatened him, even waving a gun around and pointing it at Jack. So it's just a mess, both for this family and for investigators trying to figure out what's true coming out of this family's mouths, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Just frustrating.
Yeah, super frustrating. Then, Jack said he also suspected Michelle, because according to him, Marc treated Michelle about the same as how Jack claimed he treated Carl, condescendingly. Did anybody like Marc? Is Marc a terrible person or what?
Well, according to Michelle and Carl, they had a great relationship with Marc.
But again, when Michelle was asked about this, she claimed that Marc was always good to her and that she truly missed her deceased husband.
So, what do you think so far, Rosie?
I'm kind of wondering if they're talking about the same person. Like,
it doesn't quite add up, does
are
it?
there two Marcs? Is that the twist?
Well, we'll get to that. But despite this absolute mess, this back and forth, this confusing entanglement, Detective Brooks was kind of sensing with his instinct. You know, he's an experienced detective. And to him, he felt that Jack was actually the one being the most genuine during the interviews. I mean, he was the only one to admit that Marc and his relationship wasn't perfect. You know, no relationship is. So,
despite the way the investigation began, Jack was the first person to be cleared as a suspect because they were able to verify his alibi of being home with his wife at the time of the murder.
So, what do you think about that?
Well, okay, I think this is fine and dandy, but I'm still I'm a little weary of those pictures still. That's just a really bizarre thing. And if it was grandbaby messing around for a boy, why didn't he delete them? Like, don't you think he would have noticed?
Well,
these?
there's not much detail available for that, but I would guess that the photos were taken and discovered pretty close to the same time, if not immediately.
I guess,
like, he didn't even have his phone between the time that they were taken and discovered.
Oh, I don't think that Jack did it, but I would check out the situation with the topless granddaughter.
Well,
separately.
No charges were filed, so I'm guessing that once Brooke confessed to this, they realized, you know, I feel like they would have found something there to go after if there was anything to go after, because there's not much detail around it, but it seems like the photos were taken and Michelle discovered them in the same window of time.
Okay.
That's how I imagine it in my head. I don't know for sure, but that's all the information that's available. Now, because of what Jack had said about suspicion for Michelle and Carl, detectives began looking more into Michelle, because despite first saying that things between her and Marc were perfect, she actually dropped a huge bombshell on them during the interrogation.
She was questioned about any possible infidelity, and 33-year-old Michelle admitted that she was having an affair with 24-year-old coworker?
But not only that, she was also giving him a lot of money, paying his rent, buying him groceries, and funding, a more lavish lifestyle than he could afford by working at the bank.
Well, that's weird.
Yeah.
And the money she was giving him, she was stealing from Mark's business, which was actually over $2 million in debt. Oh. It turns out the family had been living far beyond their means, and Mark's parents say that it was Michelle's influence that made it that way.
Yeah. So
Yikes.
That's really sad. That would absolutely destroy me if I was Mark and I found all this out. If you were having an affair and stealing my money and giving it to the other guy, that would suck. And Mark actually did discover this.
About a week before his murder, he had confronted Michelle and told her he didn't know if he'd stay with her after the kids were grown.
So, if he didn't stay with her, this would obviously take a huge gouge out of her finances. But on top of this, as is almost always the case, there were also 2 massive life insurance policies totaling $1 million in payouts upon Mark's death.
Mm-hmm. Of course there were. According to Tana, money was Michelle's top priority.
But the police didn't have any solid evidence yet to support this theory that Michelle did this. So, for a while, they hit a roadblock in the case.
But later, police received an anonymous call out of the blue, claiming they heard someone boasting about killing Marc Despain and getting away with it.
Wow. That's a really dumb thing to do. Also very fortunate for the investigation that this person overheard that and called. But who was this person, Rosie?
The caller identified the killer as Terrence Barker, but he was known as Qualo on the streets. Did I say that right?
I think so.
Cool.
So after this tip, police went into evidence gathering mode. They collected cell phone ping records of this man's location at the time of the crime, as well as gathering some eyewitness reports, all of which placed him in a blue Mercedes near the Despain home just before the murder. Even the owner and driver of that Mercedes, Johnny Hubbard, said that Terrence Barker had murdered Mark and told him about it in detail, which those details matched up with the crime scene.
Soon, police had Terrence in the station for questioning, and of course, he denied having anything to do with it. But after investigators began to reveal some of the evidence against him, Barker actually went on to confess the murder. Johnny Hubbard, the owner of the Mercedes, was actually one of Mark's tenants.
Yeah, so this guy was living on one of the properties that Mark owned. And remember, Michelle's father, Carl, also worked for them. And this is where the story takes an even crazier turn.
Hubbard revealed to investigators that Carl Kelley, Michelle's father, had approached him and asked him about killing Mark, threatening that if he didn't agree to it, they would evict him.
Yeah.
What?
But instead of reporting this to authorities, like you would hope someone would do, he went on to pass this job off to Terrence Barker, which I guess he knew the guy as a criminal for hire.
Wow.
Yeah.
After admitting to the crime, Terrence Barker said that Carl Kelley provided him with a gun and instructions on when and how to use it. Oh, this is not a good look.
And on top of that, apparently these instructions weren't coming directly from Carl, but actually from Michelle. The morning of the murder, she texted her dad saying, "Has to be today." Carl replied, "Okay, can you get him to lunch?"
So this showed that Michelle was involved and used Mark's trust to lure him away from home during lunchtime long enough for his murderer to sneak in and hide in the house with Carl's assistance. Then, when she came home to supposedly collect some urgent bills, she knew what she'd be walking into and pretended to be in shock and feel unsafe for the phone call.
So, it's pretty obvious that Michelle and Carl planned this. Also, sorry, our window's open and there's a very talkative bird outside.
Yeah, it is.
Sounds like there's danger.
It does sound like
Bird
that.
danger.
Okay.
Anyway, before Michelle knew that detectives had figured all this out, they brought her into the station, telling her that they had some news for her.
Once she was at the station, the detective told her, quote, "I have the man that shot your husband. The one that killed him is in jail right now."
So, Rosie, just off the top of your head, how would you expect someone to react when they learn that their loved one's murderer has been caught?
Like, cryingly grateful, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Emotional, but also not happy, but, like, grateful, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I was thinking, too. Grateful, also relieved, possibly angry and wanting to get my hands on that person and, hurt them the way they hurt me. But Michelle's response is interesting. It's not the first thing I'd expect.
She responded to this news, "You know for sure?"
Is that something you would ask investigators after they tell you this?
No, I would hope they knew for sure, and that's why they were telling me.
Yeah, you would assume that. Like, oh,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah.
Like,
I'd be like,
thank you for your help.
yeah.
I mean, again, there's no right way to act in these situations, and I would never judge someone's reaction. But knowing what I know now, that she had a hand in this, she was really caught off guard with this. And I think her response revealed that this news made her a bit uneasy.
Yeah.
Realizing that they may have put this actual evidence together. But then he dropped another bomb on her.
The detective told her, "At this point, I will also be arresting your father."
And her response to this was more emotional, shocked that they had arrested her father. But the detective confirmed it and said that he would be arrested for murder, and saying that he had all the information and evidence he needed. So she was confused by this. She questioned to verify, like, not Mark's father, because that's who she was trying to pin for all this. But the detective reiterated that it was indeed her father, Carl Kelley. He told her that her father was partly responsible for setting all of this up and having her husband killed. She must have been like, oh crap.
Yeah. Now, after this, they asked her what she thought could have possibly been his motive and what Carl would get out of setting up this murder.
And all she could think of to say was that she would be able to take care of him more afterwards.
That's weak.
Yeah. But the interrogator told her that he believed it was because she promised to split the $1 million payout with her, her father.
After this, Michelle clammed up and refused to talk to anyone without an attorney present. Carl Kelley and Terrence Barker both pleaded guilty to first-degree murder for their parts in Mark's death and were sentenced to 35 years in prison. Johnny Hubbard also pleaded guilty to hindering apprehension and was sentenced to 18 years. Michelle eventually pleaded guilty herself to a lesser charge of hindering apprehension and was sentenced to 30 years in prison.
That seems a bit bizarre to me that they would let her plead to a lesser charge when it was so obvious that she had a big hand in this. It really seems that she was pulling the strings behind the scenes. I mean, sending that text the morning of, she was the driving force behind it, and yet she got a lighter sentence. I mean, just because she didn't pull the trigger doesn't mean she's not 100% responsible. I think every single person in this chain is 100% responsible because any one of them could have stopped it. I don't think it's fair to Mark's parents. She was only 33 at the time of the murder, so she'll be getting out in her mid-60s, or maybe earlier, after intentionally setting up the murder of her husband.
Right.
Like, that's just absolutely bonkers to me. I wouldn't think of someone getting out ever after doing something like this. And her dad will probably die in there, partly because of what she asked him to do. So, it's just, this family has a lot of drama when they talk about dysfunctional families.
Honestly, it felt like Clue, like I was watching the movie Clue.
Yeah, you followed a lot of rabbit trails.
So bizarre.
But to this day, Michelle claims she had nothing to do with this.
How could she claim that?
Right? How does she explain that text the morning of the murder, especially since he'd threatened to divorce her and she had a lover on the side and the life insurance. She had plenty of motive, and the evidence all lines up with that. Now, I want to circle back to Jack.
Okay.
There's nothing substantial to be suspicious of him for. I mean, look what Michelle did to her husband. Is it pretty believable that Michelle was like, Brooke, I need you to do this. Go take some topless photos real quick.
Still.
And then,
I can see her asking.
Then Brooke goes and does it, gives the phone back to her mom, and then immediately Michelle's like, Jack, look what I found on your phone.
Yeah, it's just bizarre. But yeah, I guess I could.
Like I said, there's no info on how this actually all went down.
Right.
But there's nothing in this story to say that there's any reason to substantially be suspicious of Jack for that situation.
Yeah, so, I'm not suspicious of Jack anymore. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be associated with that if some crazy lady framed me for it. You know, how unfair is that?
That is
to shatter someone's character like that.
I agree.
So, falsely accusing someone is just as bad as any other crime, you know? It ruins their life for no reason. They're innocent. So, that's my stance on that. What do you think, Rosie?
That was interesting. That was very bizarre.
It's a very wild roller coaster, huh?
Yeah. It very much is a roller coaster. Huh.
Is your mind blown?
A little. There's just like so many different sides to this story.
I know. You know, I like to throw one of these in there, especially after we have a hard-hitting listener story that's really emotional. I like to do one that's more intriguing.
Yeah.
As opposed to heartbreaking yet empowering. Anyway, yeah, thank you for listening. We appreciate all of you who listen week after week, and we really appreciate our patrons who support us every month. You guys are amazing.
Check out our new Patreon episode. That's about... what is it about? We just recorded it a couple days ago.
Pierre Langelier and Madeline Smith.
Madeline Smith.
Yeah, this one's from 1855 in Glasgow, Scotland. I say this every time, but we like to do really old cases over on Patreon because, you know, it's been such a long time. They don't really need a current voice out on a public platform. So I think they're better suited for Patreon.
Yeah, I really like these old ones. They're fun.
Yeah, lots of intrigue. So anyway, that's where we'll probably wrap it up.
Okay.
Hope you're all doing well, staying healthy, staying as positive as possible during all this craziness going on in the world. And we'll talk to you next time.
All right. Bye, guys.